Jesus sat opposite the treasury and observed everyone and saw the widow. Some years ago, when my brother Paul was dying of pancreatic cancer, I remember that we were in Stanford Hospital, and it was several weeks before he would eventually die, but we knew the time was close. I remember this time when my sister-in-law and I were sitting, and the nurse came in and started come in to talk about the next steps. Clearly, we had the need to make some new decisions. And so Paul propped himself up in the bed, adjusted the bed, and proceeded to listen. And the nurse talked to me and my sister-in-law. Never said a word to him. And eventually, Paul got irritated and said, excuse me, if you don't mind, I know I have cancer, but I'm not dead. And I can still hear, and I can still see, and as you can see, I can still speak. So do you mind talking about me? You're going to talk to me, not about me. And she was a little discombobulated and then continued. Part of the reason that was the case was Paul didn't feel seen. Paul didn't feel valued in that moment. They were so set on busy and tending to the disease, they sometimes forget the human with the disease. Paul and I had spoken, and I was encouraging him to be the advocate and be the agent of his own care until he could no longer do that, and then my sister-in-law and I would then take over and help and be an advocate for him. And so that's why he was so strong and knew he did it. But weeks would go by and his would have no more strength to advocate for himself. And then it was our turn to advocate for him, to make sure that he was seen and valued for a human being and not for the disease he had. In today's gospel, Jesus, is this very powerful line at the beginning of this. Jesus sits opposite the treasury and observes what takes place. And in observing what takes place, he highlights and advocates for the one who is not seen, the widow. You see, the widow would have been irrelevant to so many. She was only, after all, putting in 2 small coins. See, so a widow would have been an outcast because she had no one to care for. She, along with orphans and children and the sick and disabled, would have been bundled into the cast to the side, better off not be seen. But Jesus brings light to that and advocates for the one who is not seen, the one who is not, dignity is not valued. That is our role as disciples, to advocate for those who are not seen, who are hurting and struggling. And to be not seen. And tonight, in a special way, we'll advocate for all of you who have lost loved ones and acknowledge your pain, especially those who have just lost a loved one, Luis. And how hard it is, and most often unseen. We suffer that loss. Grief is a heavy burden to carry. And people will often tell us it's time to get over your loss. But we carry the grief inside of us, and it is a heavy weight sometimes. It hurts. But it's important that we recognize its weight together. And so what we do tonight in a special way is acknowledge the weight that you've been carrying. We can't take that weight away because it is your grief. We probably don't even fully understand the magnitude of the grief that you've had, whether it be near or a long time ago. But I will say what we can do is see you. What we can do is acknowledge your pain and walk with you. And we hope that in walking with you, that we can in some way lighten the load, if only for tonight. We want to share in that. Now, what's interesting is that, it's not just those who have lost something here in a loved one tonight do we want to acknowledge, is that there are many people who lose, might have lost a job. There are many types of losses. Half the nation are grieving this week because they feel they lost something profound, that they've lost their candidate. It's important for us to walk with them as they grieve their loss. That is important for us to do because we are one community regardless of how we voted. We need to care about their pain, about their loss, their lost dreams, their grieving a loss. 47% of America is grieving that loss. And so we must help them carry that loss. We must see them, and we must acknowledge their pain. That is a righteous thing to do. You see, tonight it is important for us as we carry and help to carry each other's losses here in our loved ones that you have given the pictures of. We'll have a little ritual for that in just a moment. But that what we do is acknowledge the grief. We observe and see each other as human beings who are carrying a weight. Now, something about grief is important that we should reflect on just for 1 second. While a grief cannot, in a sense, be carried by anybody else, we need to understand what it is. It is an incredible transformative energy. And if we can hold it and carry it and harness it, then instead of it making us bitter, it can give us blessing. Instead of us being broken by it, it can make us beautiful. But it's only with God's grace that transformation can happen, that we do that together. And that the grief and the energy of grief then can be transformed into blessing, beauty, and goodness as we understand the love that we have shared continues to feed us now. That as we recognize the loss of our loved one, we recognize the presence of their love in our life that holds us and that carries us and that in the end will complete us. So tonight, as we come forward to remember our loved ones and to light a candle and to bring that candle and place it in the sand here tonight, we help each other carry the grief and to transform the grief into blessing, beauty, and goodness. And it will be that will transform this community into a community in one God who is love itself. May God take all our loved ones to himself for all eternity. And one day we will join him again. And together we will be one in heaven. Until then, we will ask those cloud of witnesses to witness to us their love and help us to carry our grief and each other's grief. We rely on the communion of saints and that great cloud of witnesses to carry the pain.